Hello everybody, hope you're having a wonderful day, and this is lesson number 17 in our dive into the wonderful world of musical theatre. And today we're going to be covering a very important concept, and that is time signatures. Time signatures extremely important in the world of music. So all of the rhythm, the duration section which we've been doing so far sort of led up to this. And I'm going to preface this lesson by saying this is an extremely tricky concept to grasp at first. It's extremely difficult to learn at first, and you know what? It's also extremely difficult to teach at first. So I would like you to pardon me if you find my teaching skills less than satisfactory, because I've been racking my brain for hours thinking what is the best way to introduce this kind of concept. And also don't feel bad at all if you don't fully understand this concept by the end of the video. Always I encourage you to pause the video, rewatch it, get a better understanding, and even then with practice comes greater understanding. So even if you don't fully understand right now, even if you understand just a little bit, with practice you will get better and you will gain some more understanding. So with that being said, let's get into time signatures. So the first question is, what are time signatures? And let me just draw up a quick staff here. So as you might know, in a staff we usually put a clef. I'll put a treble clef here. And what you might have seen in some of my music is that we put two small numbers at the beginning of a staff as well. So, and these numbers right here, you'd find a bunch of these types of numbers. These are time signatures. These are the small markings, these two small numbers we put at the beginning of a staff, right? They come after the clef, but they're always at the beginning. And these numbers are extremely important because they do a variety of things. These two numbers are called time signature, and as I said, they are at the beginning of the staff and they come after the clef. So what is the purpose of time signatures? Why do we use them, right? What are they supposed to do? Well, time signatures do two very important things. First, they help us understand the pulse of a music. So they help us to understand right. Well, they help us to understand. So there's two main reasons. First, they help us to understand the pulse of the music. So the pulse of the music. And you might be thinking, what is the pulse of the music? Well, you can think of it as the rhythm that the music has. So each music has a indicative pulse to it. For example, and that's if you're humming along or if you're tapping your foot and you're snapping your fingers. What you're likely doing is you're outlining the pulse of the music. For example, if I take have something familiar, maybe Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. The pulse of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is like this: Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, how I wonder what you are. Up, and so on and so forth. I'm sure we've all clapped like this to our children when we are singing it before. And what we're doing is we are outlined. That's the pulse of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Similarly, maybe if I take Happy Birthday's pulse is slightly different. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. And this the pulse of the music is maybe it's different for every music, and it's not always different for every music, but it's indispensable. Knowing the pulse is extremely important, both when you're a musician, when you're a conductor, and even a listener of music, an audience member, because knowing the pulse of the music is, as I said, you can take it from my word. It's extremely helpful to know what the pulse of the music is, and it also helps us musicians count the music. So we read music by counting it in our heads, and knowing the pulse of the music and the time signature is really important for how we count out the music when we're counting it in our heads and even out loud at times. So the first reason why we use time signatures is it helps us outline the pulse of the music or how to count the music and stuff like that. Number two, the second reason why we use time signatures, it tells us how many notes are there in a bar. So if this word, if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to go back, watch one of my older lessons where I talk about bars. And we learned at that time that the bars are these small lines you put down the stuff like this, which sort of divide up the music. And we do this for a variety of reasons. But at that point in time, I didn't tell you how to divide up music, like where to place these bar lines, because that had to do with time signatures. And indeed, time signatures are very important. So time signatures actually don't tell you how many notes are there in a bar, but rather the total value of notes that are supposed to be there in a bar. But regardless, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Point being, they do tell us how to place bars and how many notes go at each bar, etc. etc. Time signatures tell us that. So these are the two real reasons why we use time signatures. They're the two really important things that are time signatures accomplishing for us in the world of music theory. Now that being said, let's try to break up what a time signature is. So as I said, a time signature consists of two numbers and they're written one on top of the other. So you have one number at the top, one number at the bottom. There is no line between the numbers. This is a common misconception. There is no line between numbers. When you're writing it not on a staff, you don't write a line between them. When you're writing it on a staff, the first number goes above the middle line and nearly touches the top line. The second number goes below the middle line and it touches the bottom line. These are about the um, length of two spaces. But anyways, it's just how I write it down. Like if you're using a computerized writing system, the computer will do this automatically for you. But regardless, this is how so it's one number and another number on top. These numbers can be anything. I've written 4 4 because it's a very good example to take and it's probably the most common time signature you'll find in music. But you could have 3 2 or 16 by 8 or anything, right? So as you might imagine, when we say it out loud, when we say this, we say 4 4. So we say the top number first, then the bottom number. So if I did a time signature like this, for example, I'd call it 3 2 because I say the top number first and the bottom number later. Anyways, so as I said, these are two numbers which we place one on top of another, and these two numbers tell us very important things about the music we're talking about. So the top number tells us how many counts, or some people call this beats if I'm not wrong. It depends on whatever you feel like calling it. How many counts slash beats are there in a bar? So the top number is telling you how many counts or beats are there in a bar. And if you're wondering what this word is, I'll just explain. So counts or beats, I'll call them counts because that's the one I like you. That's the word I like you think. So counts are basically, as I said, they represent the pulse of the music. Counts are important for representing the pulse of the music, and in most cases, counts are the pulse of the music. And the bar is like a reset point. So you count. It's how you counts are basically how you count the music, right? Then each snap of a finger, you could say. And if I have 4 counts in a bar, as is the case in this case, so as I said, this number is telling me that there are 4 counts in a bar. I would count this music as 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. That's how I would count this music out. And if this number happened to be 2, for example, I would count out the music like 1 2 1 2 1 2. If this number happened to be 3, I'd count it like 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. If it happened to be 5, I count it like, well, this is 5 is actually seldom seen in the world of music. It's quite notorious for being extremely difficult to count, but I would count it as 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5, and so on and so forth. Now I do want to give you an example for how this works, because just thinking about it may not be as effective for you. So to give you an example of something that works in with 4 counts, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. This is something that's very this example is in the beginning as well. Twinkle Twinkle Little Star works in terms of 4. So if you count it in terms of 4, so it works like this: 1 2 3 4 5. And you usually reset after each bar. So you count it like this: 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2, and so on and so forth. So the pulse is very very clearly 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. To give you an example of a piece that has a 3 4 time signature, it has 3 counts in a bar. I could maybe say the theme to Game of Thrones: 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. So that's how I'm counting it out, and that's indeed the pulse of the music. And as you can see, this is what the counts mean. So it's how you're counting the music out in your head or out loud, and it is indicative of the pulse of the music. And this number is telling you how many pulses there are, how many counts there are per bar. So I give examples, and this number, as I said, can be literally anything. Now the bottom number, but now here's the thing to remember: we don't write music in terms of counts or beats. We write music in terms of notes, right? We place notes on the stuff like this. See, so we place notes on the stuff. So what the bottom, this is where the bottom number comes in. We don't write music in terms of counts, we write it in terms of notes. So the bottom number is going to tell us, the bottom number is going to tell us which note a count corresponds to. And this is one way of thinking about it. Another common way of thinking about it is what is the how much each count is worth, or what note each count is. I find it's best to conceptualize it as which note each count corresponds to, because once again we need to write music in terms of notes, right? So this number is linking us back to notes, so it's which note a count corresponds to, right? You might be thinking, well, how is this number supposed to tell us that? And that's where I'm going to take a small segue to talk about the numerical system we use in music to represent notes. So I could write this kind of signature right here as 4 1/4 notes niche, at the bottom, right? I could write it as 4 1/4 note, but this looks really weird. It looks funny, and time signatures are often written very small. They don't take up too much space on the page, so this would be extremely hard to read, especially as you used more and more different notes, right? So we don't do it like this. This is not the, for reasons that you might surmise, we don't do this. Instead, we've come up with a way to give numbers, to make numbers correspond to notes, and there's a system for this, and I'll just draw that system right here. Now I want to make something very clear right about here, is that these, what I'm about to draw for you, is not the note value. So we've talked about note values, right? For example, the note value of a quarter note is 1/4, the note value of a half note is half, etc, etc, etc. The numbers I'm about to draw for you right now are not the note value. These are just, you can think of it as the name of the note, right? Or the numerical representation of the note. These are not the note values. They are very, very, very different. They're just a way we can represent a note with a number, without having to actually draw the note. That being said, this is the system we use. So whole note, when we're writing in time signature, is represented by a 1. A half note is represented by a 2. A quarter note is represented by a 4. An eighth note is represented by an 8, and a 16th note is represented by a 16. And these are actually the denominators of the note values, but as I said, this is very different from a note value. These are, you can think of them as the name or the numerical representation of the notes. So once again, a whole note is a 1, a half note is a 2, a quarter note is a 4, an eighth note is an 8, and a 16th note is a 16. And based on this system which I've just outlined right here, you can go back and you can see that a 4 corresponds to a quarter note. So that means that in this time signature, our friend 4 4 right here, there are 4 beats in a bar, and each beat is the same as a quarter note. Each beat corresponds to a quarter note, because you got a 4 here. So once again, the top number, that's telling me how many beats or how many counts are there in a bar. 4 means I'm going to count the music like 1 2 3 4 1 2 and so on and so forth, right? So there are 4 counts in the bar, and each count is worth a quarter note, or each count corresponds to a quarter note. Why? Because I've got 4 written down here, and as we see by our system, that means it's a quarter note. And as I said, I could write it like this, but for multiple reasons we don't. Instead, this is the system we use. Now this should be fairly intuitive to grasp, this whole system we have right here, just because it's similar to the note values. But if you want to take a screenshot, if you want to memorize this, I'd encourage you to pause the video right here and maybe write it down somewhere. If you're not confident, you'll be able to remember. But usually this is extremely intuitive, and you don't really need to write it down. So okay, let's take another example and see what it means. So let's take another common time signature 3 4. Now let's try to break this time signature down. So first I look at the top number, and this is telling me how many beats are there, how many counts are there in a bar. And indeed this means that there are 3 counts per bar. That means that there are 3 counts per bar because the top number is 3. That's what this means, right? So that means I would count the music as 1 2 3 1 2 3, like the Game of Thrones theme or Happy Birthday. That's how you count the music, right? So there are 3 counts per bar, and the bottom number is telling me how much, what note each count corresponds to. And I encourage you to pause the video and tell me. So I'm assuming you paused it, and indeed this corresponds to a quarter note. So each count corresponds to a quarter note, right? So that means, let's just sum this up again. There are 3 counts per bar. That means I'm counting it like 1 2 3 1 2 3, and when I write it down, each count corresponds to a quarter note, or each count is worth a quarter note, whichever way you like to conceptualize it. Let's do one more, another relatively common time signature 2 4. Actually no, I've done enough 4 in the denominator. Let's try a new one, 2 2. This is also fairly common. So once again I look at the top number, and this tells me how many counts are there per bar. How many? Exactly 2. 2 counts per bar. Once again I count the music like 1 2 1 2 1 2, right, per bar. And the bottom number is telling me, what is the bottom number telling me? It's telling me how much each count is worth, or what note each count corresponds to. And in this case it's a half note. Why? Because the 2 means a half note. So I'm not going to write out the entire thing here. I'm just going to write half note. So each, in this scenario, there are 2 counts per bar, there are 2 beats per bar, and each beat per se is worth a half note. Each beat is worth a half note, or each beat corresponds to a half note. Now similarly, the way I've used language like English to describe these, I'm going to write down 3 more time signatures, and I would like you to pause the video right here and tell me exactly what each one means in English, right? It's okay if you are unable to, but I at least encourage you to try, because it's very important that you start to gain a grasp of what I'm talking about here. So I'll write, this is the first one, this is the second one, and this is the, actually let me draw it at a distance so it's clearer, and this is the third one. So this is one. I encourage you to pause the video here, and I'm assuming you paused it. So now we're going to go through it. So as I said, first look at the top number. That means there are 3 counts per bar. Actually I'll say it verbally this time, writing out will just be a waste of everyone's time. That means there are 3 counts per bar, and each count is worth a half note. Each count is the same as a half note. Each count corresponds to a half note, whichever way you feel like conceptualizing, right? Half note. Why? Because it's 2. Let's look at this one. Once again I look at the top number. That's telling me how many beats there are per bar. In this case there are 6 beats per bar. I count it as 1 2 3 4 5 6, 1 2 3 4 5 6, like that. And this 8 is telling me that each count per se corresponds to an 8th note. As you can see, each gate corresponds to an 8th note. So I'm writing this down. Each count corresponds to an 8th note. Similarly, when we go down here, there are how many beats per bar? How many beats per bar? 5. There are 5 beats per bar. I said the words counts and beats are interchangeable. That means I'm going to count it as 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, 1 2 3 4 5, etc., etc., right? So there are 5 beats per bar, and each beat is worth a quarter note, because a quarter note corresponds to a 4 in our system up here. So hopefully, if you didn't get that, I encourage you to pause the video, maybe rewind it and rewatch what I've just said, so you get a better understanding, because understanding this is really important as we move on to our next segment. As you can see, this is going to be a fairly long lesson, so I think it's important to get the basics of time signature down. Okay, so now that we know what this means in English and the way I've been describing it so far, right? That's great and all, but practically, how do I employ this? Let's try to figure that out. So practically, how am I going to employ this whole strategy that we've been using? So okay, what does it mean like when I'm writing down music? So once again, let's take our best friend here, 4 4, and as I said, this means that there are 4 counts per bar, and each count is worth a quarter. What does that mean when I'm writing music? Well, it is here where I'd like to address a very common misconception that occurs, that is there in the world of music, especially among students, that 4/4 means 4 quarter notes in a bar. In other words, when I'm writing in 4/4, I will write 4 quarter notes in a bar. And this is the reason I've been saying this whole full sentence, the entire video, 4 counts per bar, and each count towards a quarter note, because this saying that there are 4 quarter notes in a bar implies that you can only use 4 quarter notes in a bar, which is wrong, right? Of course, 4 quarter notes in a bar is valid under this time signature, but that's not the only thing you can do. So this is worthy of confusing many music students. So I just wanted to clear that up here. So what this actually means is not 4 quarter notes in a bar. This means that the total value of all the notes in a bar must be the same as 4 quarter notes. Now that's much longer to say and it's slightly more complicated, but it's important that you understand that what that means. So that means that the total value, whatever notes I'm writing in a bar, the total value needs to be the same. Total value needs to be the same as 4 quarter notes. The total value needs to be the same as 4 quarter notes. That means if I take the value of all the individual notes and club them together, it should be the same as 4 quarter notes. That's how we write music in a 4/4 time signature. It should be no less, no more. If it's more, it's invalid. If it's less, it's invalid. It should be the exact should be 4 quarter notes in a bar. So, and that's what this means when I say that there are 4 counts per bar, and each count is worth a quarter note. In addition to meaning you count the music like 1, 2, 3, 4, it also means that when I'm writing the music, the total sum of all the values of the notes should be the same as 4 quarter notes. Right? That's what this means when I say that each count is worth a quarter note. So, as I said, this is me dumping a lot of knowledge on you. It's okay if you don't understand. Let's get into some examples so you get a better, more intuitive understanding. So as I said, under 4/4 time signature, I can just write 4 quarter notes. But I can also write, and as you can see, this is obviously the same value as 4 quarter notes because it is 4 quarter notes. But I can also write 2 half notes. Why? Because each half note is the same as 2 quarter notes. We learned this in our note value lesson. So in total, this has the same value as 4 quarter notes. You know what I can also do? I can write one whole note, because once again, what we learned in our note value lesson is that this has the total value of a whole note is the same as 4 quarter notes. I could also write a half note and 2 quarter notes, also valid. Once again, you can double check this is the same as 4 quarter notes. And I could also write 2/8 notes, 2 quarter notes, and another 2/8 notes. And you know what? This is also valid. And you can just double check, because 2/8 notes is the same as 1 quarter note. So 1, 2, 3, another one, 4. It's the same. And all these ones I've written so far are valid in the 4/4 time signature. That means you'll find this in music, right? So this is how we practically employ what the concepts of time signature mean. That this is how we're writing down the notes in a bar. This is how we divide up using bars, right? So this is how we're placing bars such that the total value of notes in a bar is always and always and always exactly the same as 4 quarter notes, right? Now let's take another example, 2/4. Now I encourage you to pause the video. If 4/4 means that the total value there should be the same as 4 quarter notes in a bar, what does 2/4 mean? So if you pause it, right, and the answer is, let's break this down, 2 counts per bar, each count is worth a quarter note. So the total value should be the same as 2 quarter notes. 2 quarter notes, okay? Since there are 2 counts per bar and each count is worth a quarter note, that means the total value of notes in a bar should be the same as 2 quarter notes. So let's try. That means I could include 2 quarter notes in a bar, I could include 1/2 note, I could include 4/8 notes, I could include a quarter note and 2/8 notes, I could include 2/8 notes and maybe 4/16 notes, and so on and so forth. These are all valid because the total value when you put it all together is the same as 2 quarter notes. 2 quarter notes, right? Again, 2 and then it means a quarter note. So this is, as I said, probably very confusing, right? But let's just do one more example and then sum everything we've learned so far and do one last thing before we leave. So 3 4, what does this mean? In fact, no, I've used 4 too much once again. Let's take 3 2. So let's break down what this means. 3 means that there are 3 counts per bar, and 2 means that there are each count is worth a half note. That means the total number, the total value of all the notes in the bar should be the same as 3 half notes. The same as 3 half notes. The total value of notes in a bar. And that means I could write 3 half notes under 3 2. I could also write a whole note and a half note. I could also write 2 half notes and 2 quarter notes. I could also write, the possibilities are endless. I could write a whole note and 2 quarter notes, and I could write a whole note, a quarter note, and 2 eighths notes. And I encourage you to confirm that all of these do work under 3 2 time signature. Why? Because the total value needs to be the same as um, 3 half notes, right? And indeed what we have here is all of these are the same as 3 half notes. This is 3 half notes, this is the same as 2, and that's 1 3 half notes. This is the same as 1 half note, 1 2 3 3 half notes. Once again, this is the same as 1, this is 2, 2 plus 1 3, this is the same as 1, this is the same as 1, this is the same as 2, this is the same as 1 3. Okay, as I said, this might be very confusing, but as we do more and more examples, I am sure you'll understand. And you might be thinking that musicians are always, or composers are always doing so much math in their head to check if it works or what it means. They're not really. The more you do this, the more intuitive it becomes. For example, the minute you start doing exercises like this in a workbook, in a music theory workbook, you immediately get an intuitive understanding for what 4/4 notes could be. For example, I am sure that just after this this is a short example, that you would sense that this is wrong. For example, in a 4/4 time signature, and you'd be right. So musicians aren't doing some high level maths in their brain all the time. It's just you get an intuitive understanding from doing more and more practice. That's all. So now I want to take a step back and just summarize everything, because we've learned a lot, and I mean a lot, this lesson, and it's really important that we take a step back and just recalibrate to understand what all we've learned. So let's start with that. This is lesson number 17, and we talked about time signatures. Now, time signatures are these small markings we put at the beginning of a staff. They consist of two numbers, one on top of the other. Why we use time signatures for two reasons. Number one, they help us figure out the pulse of the music, and number two, they help us figure out how many notes there are in a bar, or more accurately, how to place bars. So, what's the total value of notes that are allowed to be in a bar? When we're writing time signatures, the top number is telling us how many counts or beats are there in a bar. In other words, telling us how to count the music. If there are 4, that means that I should count the music like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the pulse of the music. If it's a 3, that means the pulse of the music is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth. So that's what this number is telling us, how many counts there are per bar. But unfortunately, we can't write music in terms of counts. We write music in terms of notes. So this bottom number helps us with that. So it tells us which note each count corresponds to, and that's helping us convert the system back into writing with notes. And as I said, writing time signature with just a note written at the bottom looks very weird, and it's not a good idea for multiple reasons. So instead, we've come up with this neat little system where each note is represented by a number, and by the system, which is not referring to the note value, a whole note is the same as 1, a half note is the same as 2, a quarter note is the same as 4, a eighth note means 8, and a 16th note means 16, right? So great. And in a 4/4 time signature, that means that there are 4 counts per bar, and that each count is worth a quarter note. In a 3/4, it means that there are 3 counts per bar. I count that as 1 2 3 1 2 3, and that's how I count the music, and that each count corresponds to a quarter note. And in a 2/2 time signature, that means that there are 2 counts per bar, and that each count corresponds to a half note. Now, what does this actually mean when you're writing down music, right? Well, what does this whole corresponding mean? What that means is that when you look at what this the notes. So if there are if there are 4 beats per bar, right, and each beat is worth a quarter note, it stands to reason that there should be 4, the total value of the notes should be 4 quarter notes. Similarly, if it's 2/4 and there are 2 beats per bar, and each beat is worth a quarter note, that means it stands to reason that the total value of notes within a bar should be the same as 2 quarter notes. This does not mean that you can only have 4 quarter notes in a bar. This means that the total value of notes within a bar should be the same as 4 quarter notes. In this case, the total value of notes in a bar should be the same as 2 quarter notes, because it's 2 beats per bar and each beat is worth a quarter note, so 2 quarter notes. And in 3/2, this means that the total value of notes should be the same as 3 half notes, once again, because it's 3 beats per bar and each beat is the same as a half note, so stands to reason 3 half notes, right? Exactly. And this is how these are just some examples here. So with that, I would like to end this. However, and next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to be using these time signatures to actually start reading these notes and figuring out what they actually mean in terms of, like, singing or playing the piano or the violin or the French horn or whatever you're into. How to actually play this music, because now we've learned time signature, so we can actually do that, and that's something that's really great. And that's what we're going to be covering next lesson. And for this lesson, I've also left multiple worksheets after this lesson, where you have to either tell me what the time signature means, or place bars like this, or tell, or like do a true or false to see if this is valid under that time signature. These are the kind of problems that would come in that worksheet, and I really do encourage you to go to that worksheet, because, as I said, this was an extremely difficult topic. And you should really give yourself a pat on the back if you've understood like 60% of it, because it is really hard to grasp on your first time. So I do encourage you to go to the worksheets, and even if you've not understood it, don't worry, it's okay. I would encourage you to go rewatch the video, try to get a better understanding, maybe look at some other resources on the internet, right? And come back and practice some more with us, and I'm sure you'll have a better understanding like that. With that being said, I thank you so much for listening to me today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you next lesson.